Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to another special guest episode. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Weili Gray. Dr. Gray is a board-certified anesthesia and sleep medicine physician, as well as integrative medicine and lifestyle medicine. And she also has a tremendous podcast called the Dare to Dream podcast that she'll tell us more about. Dr. Gray, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Mello. I'm really honored to be here. I've heard wonderful things about your amazing hosting skills and your great questions, and I really enjoy listening to your podcast. So glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I gave a little bit of an intro, but tell us a little bit more about who you are, where you are in the country, and a little bit about your life.
Sure. So like you said, I do practice as a sleep doctor. I work in Vermont in a rural critical access hospital in this little rural corner of Vermont near the Canadian border. I also am married and we have 3 kids. They range from age 7, 9, and 14, although it's always hard to keep track of that. Like, don't quote me on that at any given minute. Yeah. And I am also the host and founder of the Dare to Dream Physician Travel podcast. And I love being a doctor, and I'm happy to talk more about this. At one point, I wanted to leave medicine, but I am happily practicing medicine right now. And I just have this great desire to help other physicians just be inspired to live their dream life. First of all, to really have the courage to dream. What is it that they really want in their one precious life? And then to go and live that as soon as possible. Because we may not have, 20 years or 30 years until we retire to do the things we really want. And the best time to do the things we really want is now. Yeah. So that is a lot of what I talk about on my podcast. I also am a registered life planner. So kind of like life coaching, but with this framework of we have a finite life and let's try to plan the things that you want in your life now. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because so many of us dreamed of being here, right? We dreamed of being physicians. We dreamed kind of the journey along the way. We might have dreamed of becoming a parent or a partner or any number of things. But then I think for so many people, especially women physicians who are feeling stuck and overwhelmed and burned out, it might feel like the dreaming part of their lives is over. Like maybe they're pushing towards retirement, right? Or like some end to their medical work, but no longer sort of dreaming big about like what's possible and what could my life look like. So it's almost like we've been cut off at the knee. No more dreaming. You got your dream. You're a physician. Stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Not long ago, I looked at my med school, the essay I wrote to apply for medical school. And I was like, whoa, like that was a really cool woman, that young woman that applied. She was like passionate and she wanted to save the world. She had all this energy. And then I did have this other dream, which I sort of forgot about. But even when I was sort of, I don't know, like a teenager, I'm not even sure why, but I had this conversation with a high school friend about how, or maybe it was a college friend, about how important it was for me to have kids. And I felt like for me, that was like part of legacy building. And so the crazy thing was, starting intern year, I had sort of the marriage of the two. Like my husband and I had our first baby as in my intern year, and I got an MD. I graduated medical school and got an MD, and I just remember like how horrible that period in my life was, and how nothing about that felt like a dream, even though there were both things that I had envisioned and really at one point felt like, I don't know if I could get that. a lot of people want that and may not be able to get it.
Yeah.
And here I was living that, and it really didn't feel that good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and take us a little bit further into your story. You and I have talked a little bit about how we both experienced sort of multiple periods of burnout, but what sort of stands out to you when you sort of think back to those parts? I mean, it could be that part, or it could be a different part of your story of like wanting to leave medicine, having sort of achieved things that you really wanted, right? You're a physician, you're a mom, but feeling not that good about it and not like you wanted to stay after all. What was that like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. The multiple points of burnout, the first one probably occurred even before I could put a finger on it. But the first really obvious one was exactly when we did have a baby in intern year. My husband and I had just been married a little bit over a year, and we had to figure out like how to have a life together. And we thought that my residency was going to be mostly him working and going on hikes on his own while I was going to be busy working. But instead, he was a single dad and I was trying to pump like in between during call, like in the call room. And I just felt numb. Like when I think back to that period, it was just, there was a lot of numbness, a lot of I'm surviving. Like I can be really good at doing this. I'm going to show up to my shift. I'm going to pump for the kids. So I have like the few jars of milk. And so it was kind of like there was no feeling really during any of it, because I think if I really let myself feel, I probably would have realized that something is not right. And of course, there were several times. So that was my intern year. And then we moved to my anesthesia residency in another state. And I thought, well, I always told myself, like, it's just going to get better, right? It has to get better. Like this intern year is the hardest year, so it's going to get better. And it really, I mean, it was different. But boy, anesthesia residency was really hard too. And there were all those, you have to show up, and then you had all the studying to do because you learn what's going on in the OR, and the stuff that you have to learn in the textbook is not really what you're learning in the OR. It's like the theory behind it, and you had to know that. And then they would give you oral exams, and I just remember feeling like, what, like I don't belong here. And I saw, since this is a podcast for women, I saw these male residents through no fault of their own, but I just remember comparing myself to them because they would have kids, like they had kids, and they had maybe their wife wasn't that happy, but they seemed to be okay. Like they didn't seem overwhelmed when they were showing up for these oral exams and studying. And I just thought, wow, like this really sucks. Like this is I remember showing up to the cafeteria during one of my call shifts because thank goodness they gave us like some like cafeteria money for call. And I was like, anything is better than what I'm doing. Like this person that's working in the cafeteria, like I want their job.
That's like your resident's version of like quitting to become a barista, which is like what I hear from people all the time. I'm becoming a barista. Yeah. Yeah. And it's this weird place, right? Because on the one hand, it's a privilege to be there, right? You know that you jumped through so many hoops to get there. You dreamed about being there. And it's this very intense time that can feel really miserable, isolated, lonely. We had that gender disparity sort of parts into that only magnifies, right? Especially if you were in a male-dominated specialty, which I presume, I actually don't know the details on that, kind of what the balance was.
I was definitely the only female resident that had a baby, or like, I mean, there were maybe other female residents that had older kids, but I know I was the one with like the toddler. And it wasn't that uncommon for my residency classmates to have a kid, but they were all male. And same with like the surgery residents that I saw. And I mean, honestly, it was kind of what I made of it, right? Like maybe they were suffering. And I just kind of looked at their life and I was like, they just look like they have it so much easier. And
well, and just the physical drain, right? Of being a mom in particular, breastfeeding, kind of those parts of it. Sure, there might be equal distribution or an unequal distribution of like kind of the responsibilities of parenting, but you know, we just can't discount the impact of having babies and breastfeeding babies kind of on our bodies and energy and all of that they can't replicate.
And
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing, since this is a woman's podcast, I'm just gonna name it too, which is I married a very understanding, very considerate, very supportive partner.
Mhm.
But he was really struggling. I mean, there was no example for him of like being
Yeah.
like the residency dad. And there was resentment, like for sure. Like there was no question. He was resentful of what was happening. It's like,
Yeah.
what did we get ourselves into? And
Yeah.
I that was the other thing that I perceived too, because I would look around and I would see the wives of my residency classmates, and I mean, I felt like it was just a little bit more socially acceptable for them to
Mhm.
sort of support their husbands while feeling more like a single parent because their husbands were going to go through this and make a lot of money and be the breadwinner. And it just felt more socially acceptable for that. Whereas my husband's like, I could care less about how much money you make. I just want the
Control,
support.
your presence. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and tell us, you've had these periods where things were really hard. You felt like you wanted to leave medicine. What was some of the things that started to turn that around? Where did you see things starting to shift? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, you think that. So there are a couple of things. So in my fellowship year, I went from anesthesia, and sleep fellowship was one of the things that we could do, but no one in my program actually did. So I thought that like life was gonna be so easy. Like my attendings were jealous of me. They're like, wait, you don't have to take call. I'm like, well, I do have to take call, but like I'm not gonna do a 3 a.m. epidural when I take call. And so I was like, yeah, things are gonna be great. And I caught my husband at a weak moment. And he was like, okay, let's have another kid. And then we were expecting a kid during my fellowship. Like, and even my program director was like, wow, good job. Like, you did a good job timing things. So everything seemed to align. And a week after I gave birth, I was home and
Mhm.
we had a total lost house fire. Like, there was a fire at our house and we lost I mean, we didn't lose everything like right away, but within like 24 hours, our house was gone. And that was like our life, like before we got married, like all this stuff, like we moved into this house that we owned together. So that really gave me a sense of, wow, like this life, like this is serious. Like we could have all died in there. Like my mom was visiting me at the time and to help out with the baby, and I'm like, gosh, like all four of us or five of us could have just died in the house, but we didn't. Like we made it out. And
Yeah.
so that gave me this perspective that
Mhm.
and I remember like when I learned about sort of like processing what was happening, there was a lot of tears and just emotions. Like a lot of the stuff that I really numbed myself to, they kind of started coming out. And and I was like, what, like all those times when I just showed up to work and just kind of pushed everything that's important in my life aside, boy, like, was that worth it? Like, what if someone in my family had gotten hurt in this fire or died in this fire? Like, was all of that I did worth it? Was all this that we sort of sacrificed in our life to get an MD, to have the board certification? Like, was it all worth it? And what is the price of that? And so and also because we were displaced from our home, there were sort of several things. Like I was in the middle of my maternity leave, and eventually I went back to fellowship, but there was even a question if I could go back because we couldn't find housing. It was just like very stressful. But
Yeah.
that led to the first time I asked for something, because I was sort of like, I don't even know if we have the bandwidth to like finish this, because I would have had to drive like 50 minutes to work. And and we have like two little kids, one who's an infant, and it was just very overwhelming. And so I started asking for certain things that really, not that it really affected, I didn't even have any co-fellows. I was the only fellow, but
Mhm.
it was a little bit different from what they had, the arrangements that they had with other fellows. Like I asked for, like, can I just go in 3 days a week? Like I showed them on the calendar how this was like, I would get all the required training days that I needed
Mhm.
in, but this is the arrangement that's going to work for us. So I could keep doing this fellowship. And
Wow.
my very kind fellowship director at first was like, I mean, anytime you bring up something to someone that they have never heard of, that their mind is like never encountered, like,
Yeah.
I don't know if he told me no, but he was like, wow, what about this kind of middle ground? And again, like I kept asking for this arrangement that I wanted, and I did more like math, and I showed him more of the calculations. And in the end, he was like, yeah, okay, like you can do this. And so that was the first time I kind of pushed back. I mean, like it's not like at a certain individual, but like at this path we call like medicine, right? Like I just pushed back. Like I'm like, here's my life.
Right? This is the way we do things here. Is that fellows do this and don't ask for special things. What was that experience like of actually asking? Because looking back, I'm sure it feels different than it did at the time. But as trainees, we often don't think we can ask for anything. Even in some programs, maternity leaves are a big point of contention, which just drives me crazy. But what was going on inside of you as you were asked, like realizing that you could ask for something and then actually asking and advocating for yourself?
Yeah. What's interesting is this is where I think it's helpful to be married to someone outside of medicine. So, my husband would say stuff like, well, it's really not normal to work the amount of work that you're working. And, like, why don't you just do this? Like, this sort of just makes sense. And so he would give me these ideas. And at first I'm like my fellowship director. I'm like, no, you're crazy. Like no one does that. And then it's sort of like the idea sort of sits with me. And I'm like, I mean, I could ask. I will have to say, like, I have been very fortunate in internship and residency and fellowship to work with extremely supportive programs and fellowship directors in general. And so I think there is something to be said about picking programs based on your gut feeling. Like it does make a difference. But that's not always like that. We cannot plan our life on just encountering these angels along the way. And so the way I think about it is I made the ask. It really wasn't scary. I mean, I had to kind of plan what to say, and I had to tell him, hey, I got to talk to you about something, but sort of knowing that they were really supportive of me anyway. And they knew what happened with the fire and everything that was going on. But here's the thing, that was training for me to then in the future deal with bosses or leaders that I had that weren't so understanding. And I think it's sort of like no matter who we have as a boss or authority figure, this is a skill that we all have to learn. If you can start practicing when someone who's kind and understanding, great, do it. But we may not all have that luxury. And this actually brings me to the second, or I don't know, fourth, however many, whichever time it is now that I would count as my burnout period, which was about 3 years ago. And after a fellowship, I went to this wonderful job. I thought I was going to work there forever. And it seemed like my dream job. They seemed to treat physicians really well. And there seemed to be a good relationship between administrators and the clinicians. But of course, like most places, things change. And the leadership at my hospital started changing. And so then a new person came in, and this person was perceived to be very difficult to deal with. And a lot of docs left, a lot of doctors left. And I definitely thought about leaving. This is where I thought about leaving medicine. I mean, I thought about leaving medicine, obviously, when I thought about taking the cafeteria job. But this is now as an attending.
More definitive, like I can leave here and leave medicine and just be done and walk away.
Yeah. Like 5 years as an attending, like how do I need to keep moving to look for a good leadership at whatever institution I want to go? Like that's just sounded just ridiculous and outrageous. So I'm like, maybe this is it. And so what happened instead is I went through life planning, and I went through this process where I had a chance to really ask myself and be honest with myself. What are the things that are important to me? And to really reflect, like, what if I only have 5 to 10 years left to live? What would I want my life to be like? What's the impact I want to make in the world? Or what if I only have 24 hours left to live? Like, what would I have missed? What sort of things would I have regretted? And when I went through this whole process and was able to verbalize for the first time, this is what's important to me. This is what sort of like I was put on earth to do. Like this is life is a gift, and I'm here, I'm alive, and this is what I want to do. And at the end of that process, I was like, I love being a doctor. Like, why would I want to go do something else? I absolutely love talking to patients and really just that therapeutic patient physician relationship. And that's what I signed up for. Like that's, if I look at my medical school essay, like it's so true.
Yeah.
So that then led me to think, you know, I'm gonna stay here because I'm not gonna leave. I mean, worst case scenario, I say something or do something and they want me to leave, or I may decide to leave later.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna stay right where I am at this job. And I'm gonna love medicine, and I'm gonna speak up, and I'm gonna ask for things. I'm gonna give my opinion. And yeah, so I'm still at that job. Now it's 3 years later. I'm still at that job. And having also dealt with being at the table, like everything's a negotiation. Like this is also one of the things I'm learning as an adult. So being at the table with people who aren't nice and aren't understanding and aren't necessarily open to whatever you're asking, and learning how to be present there and how to ask anyway. I think that is a really key part of us sort of becoming authentic to ourselves and us kind of being fully adults.
Yeah. Well, and I know that some of that part of your story, at least, where you advocated for a scribe and you advocated for yourself being able to take more time off. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of that journey, because it sounds like this part really informed that part, right? There were parts of needing to decide for yourself, I do love medicine, and I am going to choose to continue to practice not only medicine in general, but here. But there was kind of a shift in the way that you started to approach things. So please kind of share some of those experiences, because I think people are so hungry to hear that part.
Absolutely. I think it started with after life planning and after figuring out what's important to me and visualizing my dreams coming true, like in this moment. So it's like, wow, like those dreams seem so real. And they could be really simple dreams. It could be like enjoying a day, seeing patients where you really felt like you helped them and you felt supported in your role as a doctor. Or it could be like enjoying time with your kids, with your spouse, with your family. So it doesn't have to be like crazy dreams. I mean, they can be, but it doesn't have to be. And so as long as they're important to you. So when I started visualizing them, I thought, you know what? I am alive. And I have the freedom to get those dreams. Like nobody, it doesn't matter if it's like a toxic leader or like the bad insurance system or just corporate medicine. I'm like, those are just things. Like they're there, but they're just sort of like side characters in my story where I'm the hero and I am like this is
map, right?
They're just like little obstacles that we can just push along the way. And so that was the shift. Like that was the freedom that I gave myself. And I talked to my husband, and I mean, when I wanted to leave medicine, he's like, yeah, whatever you want to do. I just want you to be happy. I don't even like, I mean, he said this many times before, but like, I don't even care about money. And I think I just felt free to be myself and spend time and spend energy on the things that I really cared about. And so one of the things for me, and I would love for the listeners, this is a habit that if you do this every hour, like every day, every hour, just start to really tune in to what's energizing you. What's really draining you? What do you love? What would you rather not be doing? And just keep looking at your life and like imagine if you could just spend more time doing the things that you love, that energize you, and find ways to delegate or delete the things that don't. Because that's really the micro steps in living our dream. Because it's not like this, like pursuing anyone's dream is not like this humongous step that you like had planned out for like years and then you finally take this step. It's micro steps that you're taking. Like after a minute, like in a minute, you might decide, oh, you know what? Like, I am really thirsty right now and just go drink some water. It's the micro steps that we're taking every hour, every day. And so one of
We
the
learn.
things, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we are. And I even have to, as a parent, we're both parents, like I have to relearn my programming so that I am not continuing that with my kids. I'm sure I do. So if they do listen to this years later, like sorry if I'm
We're
not perfect.
imperfect parents, imperfect humans, like we fully admit it.
Yeah. But it's true. I catch myself trying to squash down my kids' needs. And so the more that I am trying to honor my own desires and my own needs, the better I become sensitive to even when I'm doing it unconsciously.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's how it all started with the scribe. It's like, if I was really honest with myself, like, yes, I love the patient interaction. I love that especially the more intense the encounter, the better the patient comes and they're angry or they're really sad. And when they leave the encounter, they're like totally transformed. I'm like, that is why I do medicine.
Mhm.
I hated documenting. I mean, everybody else seemed to really do okay with it. I mean, this is again perception. Like every other doc in my practice seemed to be fine with it. And I was the only one who was like documenting like mud at the end of the day. And so one day I just kind of like asked myself, well, why do I have to do this? Like what if someone else did this for me? And and also it's kind of looking around. Like I did hear a presentation about scribes, and it's not like I've never heard of them, but I just like it was right in front of me. And I'm like, yeah, like I needed this yesterday.
Yeah.
And when I heard their presentation, I was like, I needed this yesterday. I actually reached out to the speaker who has a remote scribe company, and they set up this sales call with me. And at the end of the call, I'm like, you're preaching to the choir. Like, I know I need this, but all your other clients are like private practice owners. I'm just an employee.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what advice do you have for me? Like, how do I convince the decision makers that this is a good service? And so they gave me some data about like, well, if you do like one or two more visits because of the scribe, then this is the amount of money you can get.
Mhm.
And but anyway, so I sort of tucked all this in the back of my mind. And this is I think a helpful strategy too, is that don't wait forever, but sometimes you have to kind of wait for the right moment. And so
Mhm.
I took this wish, and I don't know exactly how long it was, maybe 6 months or something like that. And there was some changes at work, and I basically had to have more responsibilities. And so that was actually the time when I brought this up. And at the time, just like when I brought up to my fellowship director, like, hey, can I have this arrangement? Nobody
Mhm.
that I know of, or I think anyone I spoke to there that they knew of, like no doc had a scribe at this hospital before. Like
Yeah.
this is
We
not.
don't do that here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this is the cool thing is you have to get used to that reaction, right? You have to get used to nobody's gonna sit around and just like look at you and see that you're tired or unhappy and say, hey, do you want to sit down and talk on exactly what we can help you with? No one's gonna do that. I mean, we can sort of sit here and be resentful and say that's their responsibility because they're the admins, or we could just make it happen. So
Yeah.
that's usually the first step. Like you, after brainstorming and having this nefarious plan in your head, then you have to look for an opportunity.
Yeah.
Because when I was asked to do more responsibility at work, it wasn't even like, let's talk about it, you're going to have more responsibilities. It was me
Yeah.
saying, oh, okay, let me think about that. And oh, now let's talk about it because this is more responsibility for me. And so
Yeah.
that's sort of how every negotiation, every encounter that you have with someone, you're making decisions, they're making decisions. The goal is to find ways that you can help each other, that you can one understand each other because they know something you don't know, you know something they don't know, and to brainstorm together to find solutions. That's how I think of negotiations now, which like makes it so much more fun.
But how powerful for you in your story that you were very clear on what you needed, what you wanted, what was draining you, so that you knew already what you wanted to ask for, right? You knew already okay, well, they were telling you, oh, your responsibilities are going to increase, right? And of course, we all get that from time to time, right? Short staff, whatever the things are, but you are ready to say, okay, well, if that's the case, then what I would like is dot dot dot.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is what is the common narrative that I see physicians feeling burned out, resentful, just overwhelmed, unhappy, and they just complain and complain and complain, which is fine. I mean, that's one way they're dealing with their stress, but
Yeah.
it would be so much easier when you go to the table to think of, well, what do you really need? Because that actually makes it easy for the other side. If I sat down with someone that I really want to keep them there, I want to keep them at work, I value what they do, maybe I don't know exactly how to express that. And they're like, I'm really unhappy. But if they've sort of taken time to reflect on, well, what are they unhappy about? Or I'm really concerned about this change that's coming up, and this is why. And then they tell me a solution, that is like strides and strides that we already made in this one meeting. And by the way, like the first time that I presented this at a meeting, I mean, do you think I got a yes? And I think that's where a lot of people also give up on, right? They're like, well, I was really vulnerable. I told them my problem and I told them the solution and they just shot me down.
It's years of disempowerment, right? I mean, it's years of needing that external validation and needing to go along with things, right? That makes it just seem natural. If I don't get a yes the first time, I give up because I'm sort of displeasing other people.
One of the things that I learned, and it comes from the book Never Split the Difference, is every no gets you closer to a yes. So instead of saying, oh, they said no, and oh my goodness, I thought about what I was going to say, and I told them, and they don't care about me. No, the every no gets to a yes is a great principle, because get the no's out of the way. so let them say no.
Totally normal. Especially when something's new, right? You're asking for something new, something extra. You've been sitting in the value of it for a while, right? Because you had been thinking about it for quite some time. It's brand new to them. They haven't warmed up to it. Like, of course, they're just going to shoot. Oh, no, that costs money. Like, nope. But yeah, being prepared. I love that. I love that lesson. Every no gets to a yes.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You're saying, like, you've thought about this, but this is the first time the person you're talking to has even heard of it. Mm-hmm. And what did I say when my husband said, hey, see if you can arrange your schedule so it's not as crazy? I was like, no, you're insane.
You're leveraging that.
And he was talking about me. Yeah. And so it's just realize it's human nature. I mean, we can fight it. We can get resentful. We can get mad and feel that they didn't treat us fairly. But just realize it's human nature. It's human. When you're presented with a big idea, even if the person you're talking to is able to accept big ideas, just give them the grace that they need time to process. And so it's what you do after they say no. And there's many different ways to go about it. But really, the mindset is, let's keep revisiting this. Let's keep asking. Don't just say, oh, well, that's it. I'm going to quit, or I'm just going to keep my head down and be mad but go along with it. So that wouldn't be fair. That wouldn't be fair to you. And it's not really fair to the other side either. Yeah. So eventually, make a long story short, I got a scribe, and it was amazing. It took a while to get through to many of them to ones that actually worked, but it's amazing.
Right? It takes a while.
Yeah. But not only that, my hospital then offered it to other docs, and actually at one point they offered it to all the clinicians because of other things that were going on at work that sort of was giving them more stress and more responsibilities. And so it became a tool for the administration, the people who we don't think care. It became a tool for them, a tool for retaining and to help.
Well, and then let's jump into the next part, right? Where in this last year, you made some more audacious asks that people are going to want to hear even more about, especially as an employed physician?
Yeah. Yeah. So, here's the thing. I've talked about this on my own podcast and other podcasts, because one thing that I started doing a little over a year ago is my dad had passed away, and then I felt like we needed to have a new chapter in our life as a family. And that chapter was going to be getting passports, because my kids never had passports and mine had expired like 15 years ago, and travel the world, like see the world, because in the post-COVID era, I'm sure I was not alone in having those feelings.
Yeah.
And so yeah, part of it is being able to open my mind to, yeah, I can be away from my clinic for 2 weeks, because sometimes we are our biggest barrier. All of the docs at my hospital get a very generous PTO. We're in a rural critical access hospital, so they get fairly generous PTO. But I don't know the exact numbers, but I would be willing to bet that the majority of them do not use all of their PTO. So it's just like the first is overcoming our own limiting beliefs about how we can unplug and go escape and do something that's also part of our dreams. Like you can love being a doctor and dream of being a doctor and live the dream of being a doctor and live the dream of traveling the world, if that's what you want.
Being a human who cares about other things, travel or whatever, right? Yeah. Okay. So first, again, there was this kind of this step of like, thinking, what do I want? And getting through that, like that idea, that roadblock of like, what could be possible? Oh, I don't know if I can take 2 weeks. But then we kind of sit on it for a while, and then that feels, maybe I could do that. And then what happened?
Yeah. So I actually took even more than 2 weeks. I did take a couple of 2-week trips, and then I took a 3-week trip to Australia with my family, which is really an epic adventure. And so even that, I think at probably at most practices, if you take more than X amount of time, even if you have the PTO, you need approval. So this is kind of where I ended up hitting a roadblock. And I think for that, without sharing like too much of like the details of exactly my own story there, I think the strategy that I used for that was, one, I decided it was really important to me to take a larger than sort of normally expected time for a doctor off, which most practices, it's not very long. It's like a week, 2 weeks. So I decided to be a little bit countercultural. And I sort of like, I was really confident in that. I'm like, yes, it may sound absolutely crazy and people may judge me for wanting this, but to me, this is normal. And this is what I want. Like, I'm alive. I mean, who knows? Like, I just had my 43rd birthday last week, and I learned that one of my high school classmates' husband died on my birthday. And so we may not have the luxury of time. And so I sort of, this is how I go into it. When I talk about how when you dare to dream and you want to live your dreams, you want to honor and value your dreams more than the judgment and expectations of others. And if you can do that, you can ask for anything, even if it's like totally crazy. So I had a conversation with one of the decision makers at work about, hey, listen, I know this is not the usual thing, but this is how I want to make it work. Like, I have this dream. I want to go to this place, and it's going to take more time than the usual time that we offer to as our normal vacation time. I'm not even asking for more PTO, but if I was asking for unpaid time off or whatever it is, I sort of sat down and I said, this is how it's going to work. I can see how this works out. And then I just presented my plan and I told them why. And the really interesting thing is when you are really clear in your dreams and sort of present it in a way that is human, it's very hard for people to just completely ignore it.
And so what I hear is we need to really be thinking and holding that perspective that what we care about matters, right? That it's allowed to matter, even if it's countercultural. If we can sit in that and know that that's important, then we can have the confidence to move into asking and the ability to kind of sit with getting the initial no's, right? Like we can tolerate that, knowing that we aren't wrong to ask. And it's okay It's okay to be not doing the normal thing, right? It's okay to be breaking the mold of the way that we do things here, as long as we're really clear on this is important to me. And I imagine you came a little bit with that perspective, kind of after the fire and some of these experiences that we, time is finite. We don't know, what's going to happen. And if this job didn't work out, right, if they fired you, which is a story that we hear, you are going to be fine because you can trust yourself.
Yeah. I think that was a shift for me as well. I mean, that was part of like 3 years ago, that was part of the pain that I was having and why I wanted to just quit medicine. Cause I'm like, I have no idea how to practice medicine without like having a structure in place. And I mean, 3 years later, do I know that much more? I know more. I don't know every detail, but it's believing that I offer value. When I sit in a room with a patient, I am changing their life. And whether I do it here or whether I do it some other way, I know I can do it. And this is what I want all physicians to realize. Like the work that we do in like our role in society, it's one of the oldest jobs in the world, right? Like, I mean, I don't know how old the CEO role is, but this is like, it's a way newer invention than the job of a physician. And so I think we need to collectively believe in our value, the value that we offer to humanity, and have leaps of faith when we ask for things that are important to us, whether it is practicing medicine the way that we want, or doing like a fun thing, like going on a trip.
It's funny, I hadn't thought about how new is the invention of a CEO or a shareholder or venture capital compared to the work of healing or the work of mothering, right? Like any of these important sort of life roles that we have. Oh, that's so good. I feel like we could continue talking for a long time, but maybe we'll have to revisit some of these conversations. For anyone who's out there listening, who is finding themselves feeling stuck, maybe they're considering leaving medicine as you did, what would you like to say to them? What do you feel like you wish you could have heard at some of those times in your life?
Yeah. I want all the doctors, especially if you want to leave medicine or you're feeling burnt out and stuck and overwhelmed, to know that you, first of all, one of the thought exercises that we want to do is what if we win the lottery? Like how would our life be so much better? And so we've already won the lottery because we are alive. Like on 9 p.m. on, I don't even know what day and time, the day and time of today, you are alive. You are taking breaths. This is amazing. And so as long as you're alive, nobody can take your freedom from you. It might feel like they can, but you are free. You are a free human being. And if it's hard to believe that because you're like, no, my CEO or my manager or this person, is really ruling my life. That's not true. That's if it sounds outrageous to you to say I am a free human being, then you have limiting beliefs that you can work on, and you can work on those limiting beliefs, and you will shift. You will shift into someone who is going to be more authentic to yourself. Mm-hmm. And you will shift into someone who is going to do so much more good to society because you are doing the things that you love to do, that you're good at doing. And whether that's staying in medicine, like I chose to do, or leaving medicine, whatever it is, you have a zone of genius. You have a gift that you value and you give to the world, and it's going to feel effortless, like you're not even working when you do it. And so go do that thing, whether it's medicine or not, and don't let anybody or any institution get in the way, and be creative, because you can absolutely live your dreams.
That takes us right back to that. These are just things, right? The insurance system, the hospital, like they're just things, but I'm more important than that. What I want matters. Who I am matters. I love that. This has been such a great conversation. Can you tell my listeners where they can find out more about you and your podcast?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably on a podcast app. So you can go and type in Dare to Dream Physician Travel Podcast, and we're on all the podcast apps. And I would love for you to subscribe, listen, and I love to hear from our listeners. I also have a Facebook group, so I'll give you that. So I don't know if you have show notes. If you can put that in the show notes, Dare to Dream Physician Travel Facebook group. And I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. So those are all ways that you can get in contact with me.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing those. We'll put links to that in all the show notes so people can find out more, and be sure to follow you. And of course, leave a review. You have 2 physician podcasters who are sitting here, and we are telling you that, as silly as it sounds, leaving a review matters. Leaving a review helps our shows to be found. It helps to get the word out on kind of the ways that we are trying to disrupt medicine, right? Because we are, even if we are still in medicine, we are trying to change that narrative of, well, this is just the way we do things here, so we can be enjoying our lives, right? So leave us a review. All right, my friends, thank you so much for tuning in today. It's a pleasure, as always, to be chatting with you. And until next week, take care. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you, as always, for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.